Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life. Fernando Houston stood on the wraparound porch of his colonial home, watching the Tennessee sunrise paint the hills gold. At 42, he carried himself with the disciplined posture of his 20 years in Army Special Forces, though retirement had softened some of the harder edges. His calloused hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee as he surveyed the 40 acres he'd bought with his military savings and disability compensation from shrapnel wound that ended his career. "Daddy!" 8-year-old Sophia Hubbard came bounding through the screen door, her auburn curls bouncing as she launched herself into his arms. She kept his mother-in-law's surname after Fernando married Naomi 3 years ago, but he loved the girl as his own. Morning, sunshine. Fernando caught her easily, spinning her around. "Ready for school? Can we practice shooting again this weekend?" Sophia's green eyes sparkled with excitement. Fernando had been teaching her marksmanship with a .22 rifle, much to Naomi's initial protests. "If your mom says it's okay." Fernando set her down as Naomi appeared in the doorway, her blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. At 34, she still turned heads with her striking features and athletic build from years of nursing work. "She's getting too good," Naomi said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her blue eyes. "Maybe we should focus on something more peaceful." Fernando studied his wife's face. Lately, she'd been distant, working extra shifts at the county hospital, taking calls that made her step outside for privacy. He'd attributed it to stress, but something nagged at him, the same instinct that had kept him alive through 3 tours in Afghanistan. "Violence has its place," Fernando said quietly, his eyes never leaving Naomi's. "Sometimes it's the only language some people understand." Naomi's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered. "I need to get Sophia to school. Louise is expecting her after for the weekend." Fernando nodded. His mother-in-law Louise's house lived 20 minutes away in town, and Sophia often stayed with her grandmother when Naomi worked weekends. It was a good arrangement, or so he'd thought. After they left, Fernando walked through his property, checking the security cameras he'd installed around the perimeter. Old habits died hard. The system was military-grade, motion-activated, with night vision capabilities. He told Naomi it was for wildlife monitoring, but Fernando Houston never stopped being a soldier. His phone buzzed. A text from Merle Olson. "Beer tonight? Got something important to discuss." Fernando smiled. Merle had been his squad leader in the Rangers, a man who'd pulled him from a burning Humvee in Kandahar and saved his life. They'd mustered out within months of each other, and Merle had settled in the same county, working private security. Their friendship was forged in blood and fire, unbreakable, or so Fernando believed. That evening, Fernando drove to Murphy's Tavern, a dive bar where the beer was cold and the conversation stayed private. Merle was already there, his massive frame hunched over whiskey. At 45, he maintained the intimidating presence that made him legendary among the enlisted men, though civilian life had added some weight to his 6'4" frame. "You look like hell," Fernando said, sliding into the booth across from his old friend. Merle's dark eyes were bloodshot, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. "We need to talk, Fernando. About Naomi." Fernando's hand instinctively moved toward where his sidearm would be, but he'd left it in the truck. "What about her?" "She's been asking questions. About your insurance, your assets. About Sophia's custody arrangements if something happened to you." Merle drained his whiskey in one gulp. "Brother, I think she's planning something." The words hit Fernando like a physical blow. He'd trusted Naomi completely, brought her into his life, made her his wife, loved her daughter as his own. But the signs had been there. The secretive phone calls, the sudden interest in his financial affairs, the way she'd grown cold in their bed. "What kind of questions?" Fernando's voice was deadly calm. "She wanted to know about your disabilities, your mental state. Asked if I thought you might hurt yourself." Merle leaned forward. "Fernando, she's been talking to a divorce lawyer. More than that, she's been talking to people about life insurance payouts." Fernando felt something cold settle in his chest, a familiar feeling from his combat days when the shooting was about to start. "How do you know this?" Merle couldn't meet his eyes. Because she approached me about it, asked if I'd help her, make it look accidental. The betrayal cut deeper than any shrapnel. Not just his wife, but his brother-in-arms. The man who'd save his life was now part of a conspiracy to end it. And what did you tell her? Fernando asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I told her I'd think about it. Merle finally looked up, his face a mask of guilt and desperation. Fernando, I'm broke. The security company went under. I lost my house, my wife left me. Naomi says there's $2 million in life insurance, and she'd split it with me if I helped her. Fernando sat in silence for a long moment, processing the magnitude of the betrayal. Then he reached across the table and clasped Merle's shoulder like he had 100 times before. Brother, he said softly, I understand. Do what you have to do. Chapter 2. The Web Titans. Over the next 2 weeks, Fernando played the role of the unsuspecting husband while methodically gathering intelligence. His military training had made him an expert in surveillance and counter-surveillance, skills that served him well as he documented his wife's treachery. He installed keystroke loggers on their shared computer and cloned her phone, giving him access to every text, email, and call. What he discovered was worse than he'd imagined. Naomi wasn't just planning his murder. She'd been methodically poisoning Sophia against him for months, filling the girl's head with lies about her real daddy and how Fernando was just a violent stranger who'd forced his way into their lives. The communications between Naomi and Merle revealed the full scope of their plan. They'd been meeting regularly at the Riverside Motel, their affair burning hot while they plotted Fernando's death. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Stage a hunting accident on his own property, with Merle as the witness who tried desperately to save his old friend's life. Fernando read their messages with clinical detachment, filing away every detail. Naomi had already contacted the insurance company, ostensibly to update beneficiary information. She'd moved small amounts of money to a secret account, preparing for her new life with Merle and Sophia. They'd even discussed relocating to California, where Merle had distant relatives. But it was the messages about Sophia that ignited Fernando's rage. Naomi planned to tell the girl that Fernando had killed himself out of guilt for being a bad man, ensuring she'd never question the story or miss her stepfather. They discussed enrolling her in a new school under a different name, severing all ties to her past life. Fernando's hand shook as he read Naomi's text to Merle. She's starting to ask why Fernando seems different lately. We need to move faster. The insurance money will set us free, and Sophia will forget him eventually. Kids are resilient. That night, Fernando lay in bed beside his wife, listening to her breathing, watching her peaceful face in the moonlight. She looked like an angel, but she was planning to destroy the only family he'd ever known and turn his beloved stepdaughter against his memory. He rose silently and walked to his gun safe, entering the combination with practiced ease. Inside were his service weapons, hunting rifles, and something more, a go bag he'd maintained out of habit, containing cash, fake IDs, and everything needed to disappear. He'd never expected to use it against his own family. Fernando selected a Glock 19, checking the action and loading a magazine. For a moment, he considered ending it all right there, walking back to the bedroom and putting bullets in both their heads while they slept. But that would be too easy, too quick. They deserved worse. His phone buzzed. A text from Merle, tomorrow afternoon. She says you'll be checking fence line near the back 40. Hunting season starts next week. Perfect cover. Fernando typed back, Roger that, brother. See you on the other side. He meant it literally. The next morning, Fernando went through his usual routine with the practiced ease of a man condemned. He made coffee, cooked breakfast, and kissed Sophia goodbye before Naomi drove her to school. His wife was nervous, fidgeting with her wedding ring, avoiding eye contact. You okay? Fernando asked, studying her face. Just tired, Naomi said quickly. Louise wants to keep Sophia all weekend. Girl time, you know. Fernando nodded. It made sense. Get the child out of the way before the murder. Sounds good. Maybe we can have some alone time. For just a moment, Naomi's mask slipped, and he saw something that might have been regret in her eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by the false warmth he'd grown to recognize. I love you, she said, the words hollow and rehearsed. I love you too, Fernando replied, meaning it despite everything. That was the curse of love. It didn't die easily, even when it should. After she left, Fernando made his preparations. He loaded his hunting rifle and holstered his sidearm, then walked the property one last time. The land was beautiful in the autumn light, golden leaves drifting down like nature's own funeral shroud. He thought he'd die here eventually, just not like this. He positioned himself near the fence line where Merle would expect to find him, then settled in to wait. His phone showed dozens of missed calls from financial advisors, insurance agents, and lawyers, all part of Naomi's careful preparation for her windfall. She'd been thorough. He had to give her that. The sound of boots on leaves announced Merle's arrival. Fernando turned to face his old squad leader, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. The desperation in his eyes, the weight of his betrayal, the gun already in his hand. "I'm sorry, brother," Merle said, and Fernando could hear the genuine pain in his voice. "I never wanted it to come to this." "I know," Fernando said calmly. "But here we are." The first shot took Fernando in the chest, spinning him around. The second caught him in the back as he fell. He hit the ground hard, tasting blood, feeling his life ebbing away as Merle approached to check his pulse. But Fernando Houston had survived worse than this. As darkness closed in, he used the last of his strength to key his phone, activating a pre-programmed message that would send GPS coordinates to a very special contact, a man who owed Fernando his life from their days in Afghanistan, and now ran a private medical facility that asked no questions. Merle checked his pulse, found nothing, and began preparing the scene. He dragged Fernando to a different location, arranged the rifle to suggest an accidental discharge, and called 911 with a perfect performance of panic and grief. By the time the authorities arrived, Fernando Houston was officially dead, his body loaded into a pine box and buried in the county cemetery. Naomi played the grieving widow perfectly, accepting condolences and insurance money with appropriate tears. But in a private medical facility 3 counties over, a man thought dead was fighting for his life, sustained by rage and an unbreakable will for vengeance. Chapter 3: Death and Resurrection. The funeral was a masterpiece of deception. Naomi stood graveside in a black dress, tears streaming down her face as the pastor spoke about Fernando's service to his country and devotion to his family. Merle served as a pallbearer, his face a mask of stoic grief as he helped lower the pine box into the ground. Sophia wept openly, clinging to her grandmother Louise's house, who glared at Fernando's grave with barely concealed satisfaction. The old woman had never approved of her daughter's marriage to a violent soldier, and now she had her granddaughter back. He was troubled. Louise whispered to neighbors who offered condolences. All those years of war changed him. Naomi tried to help, but some wounds run too deep. The insurance investigator asked perfunctory questions, but Merle's story was airtight. He'd heard shots while hunting nearby, found Fernando's body, tried CPR until paramedics arrived. The rifle showed signs of recent cleaning, suggesting Fernando had been maintaining his weapons when the accident occurred. Case closed within a week. Naomi received the $2 million payout within 30 days. She played the part of the grieving widow for exactly 2 months before quietly putting the house up for sale and enrolling Sophia in a private school in Nashville under the name Sophia House. The girl's transition was difficult. Nightmares, withdrawal, refusing to talk about Fernando, but Naomi and Louise assured her it was normal grief. Meanwhile, 60 miles away in an unmarked medical facility, Dr. Santos Lewis worked frantically to save a man who should have been dead. The GPS coordinates had led his team to Fernando's real body within hours of the shooting, though they'd had to retrieve it from a morgue during a carefully orchestrated equipment malfunction. Chest wound missed the heart by inches. Dr. Lewis explained to his patient 3 weeks later as Fernando slowly regained consciousness. Back shot nicked your spine, but missed the major nerves. You'll have some mobility issues, but you'll live. Fernando's voice was a harsh rasp. How long? You've been out for 3 weeks. Officially, you died on October 15th. The world mourned, moved on. Your wife collected her money and is already planning her new life with your old friend. The pain in Fernando's chest wasn't entirely from his wounds. Sophia, the girl is being told you are mentally unstable, that your death was expected. Your wife has been very thorough in rewriting history. Dr. Lewis handed him a tablet with news clippings, social media posts, and official documents. As far as the world knows, Fernando Houston is buried and forgotten. Fernando spent the next month in rehabilitation, rebuilding his strength while his anger crystallized into something cold and hard. He read every message between Naomi and Merle, watched surveillance footage of their meetings, studied their plans for their new life together. They'd been careful, but not careful enough. The final piece of intelligence came from an unexpected source, Sophia herself. The girl had been given Fernando's phone as a memento, and unbeknownst to Naomi, it was still connected to their home security system. Through the device, Fernando could watch his wife and daughter in their new apartment, could hear every conversation. That's when he learned the full depth of Naomi's manipulation. She'd been telling Sophia that Fernando had threatened to hurt them, that his death was a blessing that freed them from danger. The girl was developing a genuine fear of her stepfather's memory, exactly as Naomi intended. But children were perceptive, and Sophia began asking difficult questions. Why had Fernando been planning to hurt them when he'd always been kind? Why had he bought her Christmas presents if he didn't love her? Why did her nightmares feel more like missing someone than being afraid? Fernando watched through hidden cameras as Naomi grew frustrated with these questions, her mask slipping more frequently. In private moments with Merle, she revealed her true nature, cold, calculating, utterly without remorse for destroying a man who'd loved her completely. The kid is becoming a problem, Naomi told Merle during one of their secret meetings. She keeps talking about Fernando like he was some kind of saint. Maybe we need to consider other options. The threat against Sophia was the final straw. Fernando had been planning a careful, methodical revenge, but now time was running short. If Naomi saw his stepdaughter as a liability, the girl's life was in danger. On a cold December night, 3 months after his supposed death, Fernando Houston made his final preparations. He'd grown a beard, lost 30 pounds, and learned to walk differently to accommodate his injuries. Even his closest friends wouldn't recognize him now. He drove to the cemetery where his headstone stood, reading the inscription Naomi had chosen, "Beloved husband and father, finally at peace." Fernando laughed, a sound like grinding glass. He wasn't at peace. He was at war, and the first battle would begin tomorrow. Chapter 4, Ghost Protocol. Fernando's resurrection began with thorough reconnaissance. Using the identity documents Dr. Lewis had provided, Fernando was now William Bill Cordova, a drifter with a carefully constructed background. He rented a small apartment in Nashville under an assumed name. The location gave him perfect oversight of Naomi's new life while remaining invisible to anyone from his past. His first weeks back among the living revealed just how thoroughly his wife had rewritten history. Naomi had joined a grief support group where she performed her role as the traumatized widow to perfection, sharing carefully crafted stories about Fernando's increasing instability and violent episodes that never happened. The other group members showered her with sympathy and praise for her strength. More damning was what Fernando discovered about her relationship with Merle. They weren't just lovers. They'd been planning Fernando's murder for over a year, carefully laying groundwork that painted him as an unstable veteran spiraling toward violence. Medical records showed doctor visits where Naomi had reported concerns about Fernando's mental state, conversations with neighbors where she'd hinted at domestic problems, even a police report filed and withdrawn about a heated argument that had never occurred. But it was Sophia's condition that truly broke Fernando's heart. The vibrant, confident girl he'd known was now withdrawn and anxious, jumping at loud noises and barely speaking above a whisper. Naomi had enrolled her in therapy, where she was being systematically programmed to remember Fernando as a threat rather than the man who'd taught her to shoot, fish, and face her fears. Through surveillance equipment he'd placed throughout their apartment building, Fernando watched his stepdaughter struggle with nightmares and confusion. In quiet moments, She'd hold the wooden horse he'd carved for her birthday, whispering questions to it like prayers. Why did you want to hurt us? Why don't I remember being scared? The therapeutic breakthrough came during one of Fernando's observation sessions. Dr. Rachel Mooney, Sophia's therapist, was pressing the girl to remember specific incidents of Fernando's alleged violence. But instead of accepting the suggested memories, Sophia began questioning their validity. He never yelled at me, Sophia said quietly. He taught me how to be brave. Why would he want to hurt me if he taught me how to protect myself? Dr. Mooney frowned, making notes. Sometimes people we trust can change, sweetie. Your mother knows what's best for you. But what if she's wrong? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Fernando realized that despite Naomi's manipulation, his connection to Sophia remained strong enough to resist the psychological programming. The girl's instincts were fighting against the false narrative, creating an opportunity he could exploit. That night, Fernando made his first direct move. Using skills learned in psychological operations, he began leaving subtle signs that he was still alive. Nothing that could be traced back to him, but enough to plant seeds of doubt in his enemies' minds. A photo disappeared from Naomi's purse, one showing her and Fernando on their wedding day. Security footage would show no one entering her car, no explanation for how it vanished. Then came small objects moved slightly in their apartment. A book Fernando had given her shifted to a more prominent position, his reading glasses that should have been buried with him appearing on her nightstand. Merle was the first to crack under the psychological pressure. Fernando followed his former partner to his apartment, a squalid one-bedroom paid for with blood money. The man was drinking heavily, popping anxiety medication, and sleeping with a loaded gun under his pillow. Perfect conditions for manipulation. Fernando began with subtle intrusions. Doors left unlocked that Merle distinctly remembered securing, lights turned on in empty rooms. His service weapon moved from its hiding place to his kitchen table. Within a week, Merle was convinced someone was stalking him, though he couldn't prove it. The breakthrough came when Fernando decided to escalate. He broke into Merle's apartment while the man was at work, not to steal or vandalize, but to leave a message. On Merle's bathroom mirror, written in condensation that would appear only when hot water steamed the glass, Fernando left 5 words. Brothers don't betray each other. Merle found the message that evening after a shower, screaming loud enough for neighbors to call police. But by the time officers arrived, the condensation had evaporated, leaving no evidence except Merle's increasingly frantic insistence that someone was playing mind games with him. Naomi's reaction to her lover's deteriorating mental state was telling. Rather than offering comfort or believing his claims, she began distancing herself, worried that his instability might draw unwanted attention to their crime. Fernando watched through hidden cameras as she coldly told Merle to get his act together or risk losing his share of the insurance money. "You're becoming paranoid," she said during one particularly brutal argument. "Maybe you should see a therapist. Talk through your guilt about Fernando." "Guilt?" Merle's voice cracked. "You mean guilt about murdering my best friend for money?" "Yeah, maybe I should talk about that." Naomi's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the calculating predator beneath. "It's done, Merle. He's dead. We have the money. Now we move forward, or we all go down." Fernando smiled grimly as he recorded the conversation. His enemies were turning on each other, exactly as he'd planned. But this was just the opening move in a much larger game. Chapter 5. The Tightening Noose. January brought new challenges as Fernando expanded his campaign of psychological warfare. His targets were becoming suspicious, and Merle had started carrying a gun everywhere, convinced he was being stalked by ghosts. But Fernando's greatest concern was Sophia's deteriorating condition under Naomi's increasingly desperate attempts to control the narrative. The girl had begun asking direct questions about the inconsistencies in her mother's stories. Why had Fernando's body been buried so quickly? Why would Naomi let her visit his grave? Why had all photos of him been removed from their apartment, except one small picture hidden in Sophia's room? Naomi's response was to increase the girl's therapy sessions and begin discussions about medication for her anxiety and depression. Fernando realized with growing horror that his wife was prepared to drug their daughter into compliance rather than risk her remembering the truth. That revelation accelerated Fernando's timeline. He needed to separate Sofia from Naomi's influence while simultaneously destroying his enemy's ability to harm anyone else. The solution required bringing in additional resources, specifically other people Naomi had wronged. Fernando's investigation revealed that he wasn't Naomi's first victim. Her maiden name was actually Naomi Chase, and she'd been married twice before. Her first husband had died in a suspicious car accident after taking out a substantial life insurance policy. Her second husband, Sofia's biological father, had allegedly committed suicide, though the circumstances were questionable. Both men had been wealthy, both had died under circumstances that enriched Naomi, and both had been portrayed posthumously as unstable or abusive. The pattern was clear. Naomi was a serial killer who specialized in murdering husbands for insurance money. Fernando tracked down relatives of her previous victims, finding a network of people who'd always suspected Naomi but lacked evidence to prove their suspicions. Dr. Jeremy Hood, a psychiatrist whose brother had been Naomi's second husband, had been investigating her for years. When Fernando approached him with recordings of Naomi's conversations with Merle, the doctor's reaction was explosive. "I knew that bitch killed David," Dr. Hood said, his professional composure cracking. "But she was too smart, too careful. The police bought her grieving widow act completely." "She's not careful anymore," Fernando said, showing him photos of Naomi and Merle together. "Greed and arrogance have made her sloppy. We can bring her down, but I need your help." Dr. Hood agreed immediately, offering not just his expertise in psychological manipulation, but also access to legal and financial resources that could be used against their common enemy. Together, they began constructing a trap that would expose Naomi's crimes while protecting the innocent child caught in the crossfire. The plan required Fernando to take enormous personal risks. He would have to get close enough to Naomi to gather the evidence needed for prosecution, which meant revealing his survival. But first, he needed to ensure Sofia's safety and begin deprogramming the lies that had been planted in her mind. Fernando's opportunity came when Louise's house suffered a heart attack and was hospitalized. Naomi, focused on managing her mother's medical crisis while maintaining her secret relationship with Merle, temporarily loosened her control over Sofia. The girl was staying with a neighbor, practically unsupervised for the first time in months. Using his knowledge of Sofia's routines, Fernando arranged a seemingly accidental encounter at the park where she played after school. Disguised as Bill Cordova, he approached the lonely child with a story about being a friend of her stepfather's who had stories to share. "Fernando talked about you all the time," he told Sofia, watching her reaction carefully. "He said you were the bravest little girl he'd ever met." Sofia's eyes filled with tears. "He did, but Mama says he was mean and didn't really love me. What do you think?" Fernando asked gently. "Do you remember him being mean?" The girl shook her head slowly. "I remember him being kind. He taught me things. He made me feel safe." She looked up at Fernando with desperate hope. "Do you think he really loved me?" "I know he did," Fernando said, his voice thick with emotion. "He talked about adopting you officially. He wanted to be your daddy forever." For the first time in months, Sofia smiled. A real smile, not the frightened expression she'd worn since Fernando's supposed death. "I miss him so much, but Mama gets angry when I say that." Fernando spent an hour with his stepdaughter, carefully planting seeds that would help her resist Naomi's programming while gathering intelligence about the woman's current plans. What he learned was disturbing. Naomi was already considering moving to another state, possibly even changing Sofia's name completely to erase all traces of her previous life. "She says we might go to California," Sofia confided. "But I don't want to leave. This is where Daddy Fernando is buried. If I leave, who's going to visit his grave?" The innocence and loyalty in her voice nearly broke Fernando's resolve to remain hidden. But revealing himself prematurely would ruin everything and potentially put Sofia in greater danger. Instead, he made her a promise. "Someone who loved Fernando very much will always make sure his grave is visited," he said. "And someday, when you're older you'll understand that the people who really love us never really leave. They find ways to watch over us, even when we can't see them. As he walked away from that meeting, Fernando felt the last vestiges of mercy drain from his heart. Naomi had stolen his life, corrupted his memory, and traumatized an innocent child. She deserved no quarter, no second chances, no mercy of any kind. The time for subtle psychological games was ending. Soon, it will be time for more direct action. Chapter 6. Setting the Trap. February brought a cold snap that mirrored the ice in Fernando's heart as he finalized preparations for the endgame. His alliance with Dr. Jeremy Hood had proven invaluable, providing both psychological insights and legal resources that would be crucial for protecting Sophia when the truth finally emerged. The key breakthrough came when they discovered Naomi's mistake. She'd been using the same methods to research her fourth potential victim. Credit reports showed she'd been investigating the financial status of Stuart Spence, a wealthy contractor she'd met at her grief support group. Phone records revealed she was already working to isolate him from his family while presenting herself as a healing presence in his life. She's addicted to it, Dr. Hood explained during one of their planning sessions. The power, the money, the thrill of completely destroying someone who trusts her. She can't stop herself. Fernando watched surveillance footage of Naomi's calculated seduction of Stuart, seeing the same techniques she'd used on him years ago. The intimate conversations designed to uncover vulnerabilities, the gradual introduction of doubts about his family's loyalty, the positioning of herself as the only person who truly understood him. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. But Stuart Spence was different from Fernando. He was softer, more trusting, without the paranoid instincts that came from military training. He was falling for Naomi's act completely, even beginning to discuss marriage despite her relatively recent widowhood. Fernando realized that Naomi's pattern gave him the perfect opportunity. She would eventually try to kill Stuart just as she'd killed her previous husbands, but this time, Fernando would be watching. He would gather irrefutable evidence of her murderous nature while protecting her intended victim. The plan required extraordinary precision. Fernando would have to shadow Naomi's courtship of Stuart, document her manipulation techniques, and be prepared to intervene at the moment she transitioned from seduction to murder. Meanwhile, Dr. Hood would work through official channels to build a legal case based on the pattern of suspicious deaths surrounding Naomi. But first, they needed to ensure Sophia's safety. The girl's resistance to her mother's programming was becoming more pronounced, creating a dangerous situation. Naomi was growing frustrated with her daughter's questions and had begun discussing more drastic solutions with Merle. Maybe boarding school would be better, Naomi suggested during one recorded conversation. Somewhere far away where she can get intensive therapy and forget about the past completely. Merle's response revealed his own deteriorating mental state. Or maybe we should just disappear. Take the money and go somewhere they'll never find us. Start completely over, and leave loose ends behind. Naomi's voice carried a chill that Fernando recognized, the same tone she'd used when discussing his own murder. That's not how this works. Fernando realized that both Sophia and Stuart were in immediate danger. Naomi was planning to eliminate all traces of her past life, which meant killing anyone who might remember her previous identities or question her stories. His stepdaughter wasn't just an inconvenience. She was a witness who needed to be silenced. The revelation accelerated Fernando's timeline dramatically. He couldn't wait for the perfect moment to expose Naomi's crimes. He needed to act before she harmed Sophia or successfully trapped another victim. His opportunity came when Louise's house was released from the hospital but remained too weak to care for Sophia. Naomi arranged for the girl to stay with her friend Camille McCullough, a nurse from the hospital who'd been taken in by the grieving widow's performance. It was the first time in months that Sophia would be away from Naomi's direct supervision for an extended period. Fernando used those precious days to begin rehabilitating his stepdaughter's memories. Disguised as Bill Cordova, he arranged several chance encounters that allowed him to share stories about her stepfather, real stories that contradicted Naomi's manufactured narrative. Fernando used to say you had the heart of a warrior, he told Sophia during one meeting. He said you were braver than any soldier he'd ever known. The girl's eyes shone with remembered pride. He really said that? He said all the time. He also said that warriors always protect the people they love, even when it's hard, even when others don't understand. Fernando could see the conflict in Sophia's young mind as she tried to reconcile these positive memories with her mother's dark stories. But slowly, carefully, he was winning the battle for her soul. The final piece of the trap was set when Fernando approached Stuart Spence directly, revealing just enough truth to plant seeds of doubt without exposing his own survival. Posing as a private investigator hired by concerned family members, he shared evidence of Naomi's previous marriages and the suspicious circumstances surrounding her husband's deaths. Stuart's reaction was predictable. Initial disbelief followed by growing unease as the evidence mounted. But rather than confronting Naomi directly, he began watching her more carefully, documenting her behavior and statements in case Fernando's warnings proved accurate. By the end of February, all the pieces were in position. Naomi was accelerating her timeline with Stuart, while growing increasingly paranoid about Sophia's resistance to her programming. Merle was spiraling into alcoholism and paranoia, becoming a liability she would soon need to eliminate. And Fernando was positioned to intervene at the crucial moment when her carefully constructed facade finally crumbled. The final act was about to begin, and this time, Fernando Houston would be the one writing the script. Chapter 7. First Blood. March arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if nature itself was preparing for the violence to come. Fernando had spent the winter gathering evidence, positioning assets, and preparing for the moment when he would step out of the shadows to claim his vengeance. That moment came when Naomi made her first critical mistake. She tried to kill Stuart Spence too soon. Stuart had grown suspicious enough to start asking uncomfortable questions about Fernando's death, prompted by the private investigator's warnings. During what should have been a romantic dinner at Stuart's house, he casually mentioned that he'd spoken to people who knew Fernando and was surprised by their descriptions of him as stable and loving. Fernando watched through surveillance equipment he'd planted in Stuart's home as Naomi's mask slipped for just a moment. A flash of rage quickly covered by concern. "Oh, Stuart," she said softly, "you don't understand how good Fernando was at hiding his problems. Even his closest friends didn't see the darkness in him. That's what made him so dangerous." But Stuart wasn't convinced. The man they described doesn't sound dangerous. He sounds like someone who loved his family deeply. Naomi's response was swift and decisive. She excused herself to the bathroom, returning with Stuart's prescription medication, heart pills that became lethal when combined with the alcohol she'd been encouraging him to drink. Fernando watched her slip the pills into Stuart's wine glass while he was distracted by a phone call. Fernando had seconds to decide. He could let Stuart die and use the murder as evidence against Naomi, or he could intervene and risk revealing his survival before everything was in place. The decision was made for him when he saw Stuart raise the poisoned glass to his lips. The sliding glass door exploded inward as Fernando crashed through it, tackling Stuart to the ground just as the man began to drink. The wine glass shattered against the hardwood floor, spilling its lethal contents. "What the hell?" Stuart started, but Fernando cut him off with a harsh whisper. "The wine is poisoned. She was going to kill you tonight." Naomi stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the man she'd murdered 3 months earlier. Her face cycled through shock, terror, and finally a cold calculation that Fernando remembered from their last night together. "Fernando," she said quietly, "you're supposed to be dead. So are a lot of people, apparently." Fernando stood slowly, his hand moving instinctively toward his concealed weapon. "David Chase, Michael House, and now Stuart. How many husbands have you killed, Naomi?" Stuart scrambled to his feet, backing away from both of them. "What is this? Who are you people?" "I'm Fernando Houston," Fernando said, never taking his eyes off his wife. "The man she murdered for insurance money. The man whose daughter she's been torturing with lies about being afraid of his memory." Understanding dawned in Stuart's eyes, followed quickly by horror. "The wine, you're going to kill you and make it look like a heart attack," Fernando confirmed. "Same way she killed her other husbands." Same way she tried to kill me. Naomi had recovered her composure, calculating angles and options with the cold efficiency of a predator. You have no proof of anything, Fernando. You're supposed to be dead, which makes you legally nothing. A ghost. A phantom who broke into Stuart's house and threatened his life. She was right, and they both knew it. Fernando's legal death complicated everything. He couldn't simply walk into a police station and file charges. But he'd prepared for this contingency. I don't need legal proof, Fernando said softly. I just need justice. Naomi smiled, the expression chilling in its complete lack of warmth. You always were too emotional, Fernando. It's what made you weak. It's what made you easy to kill. But I didn't die, did I? Merle missed my heart by 2 inches. His guilt made him sloppy. Fernando stepped closer, watching her flinch despite her attempts at control. Where is he, by the way? Still drinking himself into a stupor every night? Still jumping his shadows? Merle is none of your concern. Everything about this is my concern. You took my life, destroyed my daughter's memories of me, and we're about to kill another innocent man. That makes it very much my concern. Stuart had been listening to this exchange with growing horror. I'm calling the police, he said, reaching for his phone. No, Fernando said sharply. Not yet. There's something else we need to discuss first. He turned back to Naomi. Where is Sophia? For the first time, real fear crossed Naomi's face. She's safe. She's being cared for. By whom? Camille McCullough? The nurse who thinks you're a grieving widow. Fernando smiled grimly. I've been watching Naomi. I know everything about your new life, your plans, your lies. The question is, what were you planning to do with Sophia after you killed Stuart? Naomi's silence was answer enough. Fernando felt the familiar cold rage settle over him, the same feeling that had kept him alive through 3 tours of combat. You were going to kill her too, he said quietly. She was becoming too much of a liability, asking too many questions. Another accident was in the works. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Fernando's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. You're a predator who destroys everything she touches. You've killed 3 husbands, traumatized an innocent child, and corrupted the memory of everyone who ever loved you. But that ends tonight. Stuart finally found his voice. We need to call the authorities. Both of you are scaring me, and I want you out of my house. Fernando nodded. You're right. This isn't your fight. He looked at Naomi with cold purpose. But it is mine, and it's time to finish what you started. What happened next would be remembered differently by each witness, but the end result was the same. Naomi Chase Houston disappeared into the night, beginning a deadly game of cat and mouse that would finally reveal which of them was truly the predator. Chapter 8. The Hunt. The manhunt began at dawn. Stuart Spence, thoroughly shaken by the previous night's revelations, had called the police despite Fernando's warnings about legal complications. The responding officers found evidence of the break-in, the shattered wine glass, and traces of the heart medication that would have killed Stuart within hours. But they also found something else, security footage from Stuart's own cameras showing Fernando Houston, a man officially dead for 5 months, crashing through the glass door to save a stranger's life. The legal implications were staggering, but the immediate concern was locating 2 dangerous fugitives who were now hunting each other through the Tennessee hills. Detective Francine Starr of the Metro Nashville Police found herself dealing with the most bizarre case of her 20-year career. The evidence was clear that Naomi Houston had attempted murder, but her victim was technically a dead man with no legal standing to make accusations. Meanwhile, forensic analysis of Fernando's supposed grave revealed that the buried body was actually that of a John Doe from the morgue, switched during a carefully orchestrated deception. So we have a serial killer who's been murdering husbands for insurance money, Detective Starr explained to her captain, being hunted by one of her supposed victims who faked his own death and has been stalking her for months. And now they're both armed and dangerous fugitives playing some kind of twisted game of revenge. The captain rubbed his temples. What about the child? Sophia House. Safe for now. She's with the nurse, Camille McCullough, who's been told her mother had to leave town for a family emergency. But that won't last long. The girl's asking questions, and she's starting to remember things that contradict her mother's stories. What Detective Starr didn't know was that Fernando had anticipated this development. Before confronting Naomi at Stewart's house, he'd arranged for Dr. Jeremy Hood to take legal custody of Sophia through emergency child services channels. The psychiatrist documented concerns about the girl's psychological condition, combined with evidence of Naomi's pattern of deception, had been enough to remove Sophia from immediate danger. Meanwhile, the deadly game between Fernando and Naomi was escalating. She had vanished from Stewart's house with nothing but the clothes on her back and a gun from Stewart's collection, but Fernando knew she would eventually surface. Naomi was too dependent on her established identity and resources to disappear completely. She would try to retrieve money, documents, or other assets that would give Fernando an opportunity to track her. He was right. 2 days after the confrontation, surveillance equipment at their old house detected movement. Naomi had returned under cover of darkness to recover cash and fake identification documents she'd hidden for emergencies. But Fernando was waiting. The house felt like a mausoleum as they faced each other in what had once been their living room. Moonlight streamed through windows, illuminating family photos that Naomi had somehow missed when she'd purged Fernando's memory from their lives. "You always were predictable," Fernando said from the shadows near the staircase. Creatures of habit never change their patterns, even when they should. Naomi spun toward his voice, the stolen pistol trembling in her hands. "How did you know I'd come here?" "Because you're not as smart as you think you are. You're just ruthless." Fernando stepped into the light, showing his empty hands. "You've been making the same mistakes for years, killing the same way, using the same methods. The only reason you got away with it was because nobody bothered to look for patterns. But you looked." Her voice carried grudging respect, mixed with hatred. "I had motivation. You tried to erase me from existence, turn my daughter against my memory, and steal everything I'd worked for. That tends to focus a man's attention." Naomi raised the gun, pointing it directly at Fernando's chest. "I should have made sure you were dead the first time." "Probably. But you trusted Merle to handle it, and guilt makes people careless." Fernando smiled coldly. "Speaking of Merle, when was the last time you heard from him?" The question clearly unsettled her. "What do you mean?" "I mean your partner in murder has been drinking himself to death for months, jumping at shadows, convinced that ghosts are stalking him. The psychological pressure finally broke him completely." Fernando paused for effect. "He killed himself yesterday. Left a full confession describing how you seduced him into murdering me." The lie hit Naomi like a physical blow. Her face went white, and the gun wavered in her grip. "You're lying." "Am I? Check your phone. I'm sure the police have been trying to reach you since they found his body." Fernando took a step closer. Poor Merle. All that guilt finally caught up with him. But he made sure to tell the truth before he died. About the insurance money, about your other husbands, about everything. Naomi's composure was cracking. The careful mask she'd worn for years was fragmenting under the pressure of fear and desperation. Even if that's true, they can't prove anything. Merle was unstable, suicidal. His word means nothing. His word means everything when it's supported by evidence. Recorded conversations, financial records, testimony from your previous victims' families. Fernando smiled at her growing panic. "Did you really think you could kill 3 men without leaving any trace? Dr. Jeremy Hood has been investigating you for years. He just needed someone with access to provide the final pieces." The gun was shaking badly now as Naomi realized the full scope of the trap closing around her. "What do you want?" "Justice," Fernando said simply. "For David Chase, for Michael House, for me, and most importantly, for Sophia, an innocent child whose life you've been systematically destroying. She's my daughter. She's a victim of your manipulation and abuse. You've been poisoning her mind, making her afraid of her own memories, preparing to murder her when she became too much of a liability." Fernando's voice hardened. "But that ends now." Naomi's last desperate gambit was predictable. She threatened to kill herself rather than face justice. But Fernando had anticipated even this, positioning himself between her and the only exit while backup plans activated automatically. The final moments of their confrontation would be replayed endlessly in court proceedings and media coverage. But for Fernando, the important thing was that justice was finally served and an innocent child was safe from the monster who had pretended to be her mother. Chapter 9. Blood and Absolution. The standoff lasted through the night. Police surrounded the house where Fernando and Naomi Houston faced each other in the ruins of their former life, but neither was willing to surrender on the other's terms. Fernando wanted Naomi to confess to her crimes and face legal justice. Naomi wanted to escape with enough resources to disappear forever, leaving her past buried with her supposed victims. As dawn broke over the Tennessee hills, Detective Francine Starr received the call that changed everything. Merle Olson's body had been found in his apartment, a .45 caliber gunshot wound to the head and a detailed suicide note confessing to multiple murders. But he hadn't killed himself. Forensic evidence revealed he'd been executed, though staged to look like suicide. "Someone beat us to him," the coroner explained to Detective Starr. "Professional job. Single shot, powder burns consistent with close contact, but the angle's wrong for self-infliction. Whoever did this wanted it to look like guilt-driven suicide." The confession letter was thorough, describing Naomi's recruitment of Merle for Fernando's murder, her history of killing previous husbands, and detailed accounts of how each crime had been committed. But the handwriting analysis revealed it had been written under duress. Someone had forced Merle to document his crimes before killing him. Detective Starr realized she was dealing with more than a domestic murder case. Someone with professional skills was eliminating witnesses and tying up loose ends. Someone who wanted Naomi's crimes exposed, but was willing to commit murder to ensure she couldn't escape justice. Inside the house, Fernando watched dawn light reveal the full devastation of his former life. Wedding photos with broken glass, children's drawings torn from the refrigerator, memories deliberately destroyed by a woman who'd never valued anything but money and control. "You killed Merle," Naomi said quietly. It wasn't a question. He was a weak man who betrayed his brother for money. Weak men don't deserve clean deaths. Fernando's voice carried no emotion, no regret. He begged at the end, cried like a child while he wrote out his confession. "The police will know it wasn't suicide. Probably. But they'll also have a detailed confession describing every one of your murders, along with physical evidence I made him reveal before he died." Fernando smiled coldly. "Merle kept trophies, Naomi. Jewelry from your victims, photographs, even recordings he made without your knowledge. Insurance policies in case you decided he was a liability." The revelation shattered what remained of Naomi's composure. She trusted Merle completely, never suspecting he might document their crimes as protection against her eventual betrayal. "Where?" she whispered. "Hidden in his apartment. The police will find everything within hours." Fernando stepped closer, no longer concerned about the gun in her trembling hands. "It's over, Naomi. You can surrender and face trial, or you can run and spend the rest of your short life looking over your shoulder. But either way, your daughter is safe from you." The mention of Sophia triggered one final desperate act. Naomi raised the gun, not toward Fernando, but toward her own head, making the same threat she'd used to manipulate victims for years. "If I die, she'll never know the truth," Naomi said desperately. "She'll always wonder what really happened, always carry the guilt of not saving her mother." Fernando's response revealed the depth of his transformation from loving husband to merciless predator. "Sophia isn't your daughter anymore. Dr. Jeremy Hood has legal custody, and she's already beginning to remember who really loved her. Your death won't traumatize her, it will free her." The psychological blow was devastating. Naomi had based her entire identity on the belief that she was indispensable to those around her, that her victims needed her enough to forgive any cruelty. Learning that even her own daughter was better off without her shattered something fundamental in her psyche. The gun dropped from nerveless fingers as Naomi collapsed to her knees, finally understanding that she had lost everything: her victims, her freedom, her child, and most importantly, her power over others. Fernando stood over her broken form without pity or mercy. David Chase was a good man who deserved better than you. Michael House loved you completely and died believing you cared for him. And he paused, remembering the man he'd been before she destroyed his capacity for forgiveness. I would have died for you willingly, but you chose murder and betrayal instead. Police stormed the house minutes later, finding Naomi in catatonic shock and Fernando calmly waiting with his hands visible and empty. The legal complications of prosecuting a man who'd faked his own death would take months to resolve, but the evidence against Naomi was overwhelming. The trial became a media sensation, with Fernando's testimony providing devastating details about Naomi's pattern of manipulation and murder. Dr. Jeremy Hood testified about Sophia's recovery, describing how the girl had blossomed once removed from her mother's toxic influence. Stuart Spence provided evidence about the attempted poisoning that would have made him victim number 4. But the most damning testimony came from Merle's posthumous confession, corroborated by physical evidence and financial records that showed a clear pattern spanning multiple marriages and suspicious deaths. Naomi Chase Houston was convicted on 3 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death by lethal injection. She showed no remorse during sentencing, maintaining her innocence despite overwhelming evidence. Fernando disappeared after the trial, his legal status still unresolved and his future uncertain. But he left behind a trust fund for Sophia's education and care, along with a letter explaining his actions and expressing his love for the girl who would always be his daughter. Sophia, now living with Dr. Hood and slowly healing from years of psychological abuse, kept one memento of her stepfather, the wooden horse he'd carved for her birthday. Sometimes she would hold it and whisper questions to it, but now they were different questions. Are you proud of me? Are you watching over me like you promised? And somewhere in the Tennessee hills, a man who had been Fernando Houston and was now someone else entirely would hear those whispered words and know that some forms of love transcend death, betrayal, and even the brutal necessities of justice. The story ended as it began, with violence and loss. But this time, the innocent were protected, the guilty were punished, and a man who had been murdered found a way to rise from his grave to claim the vengeance that the living world had denied him. Some wounds cut too deep for forgiveness. Some betrayals demand blood, and some men, once betrayed, become something far more dangerous than their enemies ever imagined. Fernando Houston was dead. What emerged from his grave was something darker, colder, and infinitely more ruthless. A phantom built from pain and perfected by the brutal arithmetic of revenge. And in the end, that phantom had balanced the scales of justice with the only currency that truly mattered: the blood of those who had stolen everything he loved and tried to erase him from existence. Justice had been served. The dead could finally rest in peace. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.